Ah, another swipe left. Tinder was officially dead tonight. Just endless selfies and dudes who thought gym pics counted as personality. My friends were already buzzing about some club downtown, but the thought of getting dolled up for another round of disappointing conversations made me want to crawl into bed. Then, boom, a flash of messy hair and a disarming smile popped up. Nathan. His profile was cute, the kind with silly facts about board games that made me think he might actually be fun. I swiped right and crossed my fingers. A match. We messaged for a bit, and damn, the guy had banter. A week later, we were sitting across from each other in one of those hipster coffee places, and it was like magic. Everything felt easy, like we'd been friends forever. Maybe Tinder wasn't completely useless after all. We ended up wandering the streets for hours, laughing so hard my stomach ached. We passed a street guitarist, and without a word, Nathan dug a $10 bill out of his pocket and dropped it into the guy's case with a dramatic bow. He leaned in, all serious-like, and whispered, "Here's to our happily ever after." Cute, right? And yeah, a part of me melted. But another part, the nagging little voice in the back of my head, thought, really dude? A bit much, isn't it? See, Nathan had this sweet, always looking out for you vibe that was super appealing at first. But I don't know, sometimes it felt a bit smothering. Back at my place, I could tell he wanted to stay. Standing in my doorway, he had this hopeful puppy dog look. Honestly, he was adorable. But I'll admit, I was feeling a little mischievous. "Come on in, I said, trying to sound playful but knowing there was a bit of an edge to it. Or are you afraid?" The thing is, I didn't mean to hurt his feelings. I guess I was just testing him, seeing if he had a backbone under all that sweetness. Of course, the second I said it, I sort of regretted it. But it was too late now. The playful grin Nathan wore just seconds before vanished like it was never there. Something in his eyes went dark, a flicker of pain I'd never seen before. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a forced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sure, no problem," he mumbled, stepping into my apartment. I tried to brush off the awkwardness, blaming it on a long day and figuring a bit of lighthearted teasing would dissolve the tension. Boy, was I wrong. The early days of our relationship were still fresh in my mind, whirlwind dates, hours spent talking about everything and nothing, the feeling that we'd somehow stumbled upon something special. Nathan went above and beyond, always checking in, always ready with a surprise or a sweet gesture. It started to feel like I was in a fairy tale. A fairy tale where the prince was a bit more eager servant than knight in shining armor. "He's so perfect for you," my best friend, Sarah, gushed over our weekly wine night. "Seriously, what a keeper." "He is," I agreed, forcing a brightness I didn't entirely feel. "It's just, I don't know, sometimes I wish he had a bit more of a backbone." As Nathan took over the household duties, cooking, cleaning, even the laundry I hated, a tiny part of me was relieved. I'd always been a go with the flow kind of girl, and having someone step up and just handle stuff was nice. Yet, that same little voice that had quipped on our first date poked at me with increasing frequency. My friends started picking up on it too. "Dude, Nathan's totally whipped," they'd laugh during girls' nights. I'd join in, the playful teasing feeling a bit more acidic each time. One lazy Sunday, as we sprawled on the couch watching some dumb rom-com, it just sort of slipped out. "Babe, you're such a sometimes, you know? Maybe I should find someone stronger." It was meant to be a playful jab, a way to stir him up. Instead, a thick silence fell that seemed to suck the air out of the room. The stupid movie blared on, the tinny dialogue suddenly a painful contrast to the heavy quiet between us. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I desperately searched Nathan's face for a reaction, any reaction, but he just stared blankly at the screen. Finally, with a curt nod, he rose from the couch, mumbled something about needing some air, and left the apartment. His exit was so abrupt it felt more like a dismissal than a break. The days that followed were a haze of confusion and worry. The warmth in Nathan's eyes had cooled. He went through the motions, work, dates, even the occasional kiss, but it was like something inside him had switched off. Gone were the goofy texts, the playful touches, the sense of effortless connection we once shared. I tried everything. I cooked his favorite meal, planned a surprise movie night, even upped my flirt game to see if a spark could be reignited. But with each attempt, the distance seemed to grow a bit wider. His replies were polite, his affection measured. I felt like a ghost in our once vibrant relationship. One morning, I woke to the overflowing laundry basket I usually toss directly into the washer. Next to it, a stack of dirty dishes filled the sink. These simple chores had become Nathan's way of quietly making me feel cared for, and their absence made my stomach clench. Was this a deliberate power play? A silent punishment for my careless words? The guilt was a constant gnawing ache in my chest. I missed the way he used to look at me, the way he made me feel safe with those silly little gestures. Yet, my frustration and mounting insecurity were just as strong. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. The confrontation had been brewing for days. "Nathan, please, what in the world is going on? Why are you acting like this?" He sighed, a heavy exhale that seemed to carry the weight of everything unspoken. "Am I overreacting? Honestly, Rose, tell me. Because that comment of yours, it really hurt." My first gut reaction was defensiveness. Overreacting? Seriously? But another part of me, the part laced with guilt, squeezed my insides. I suddenly remembered that flicker of pain in Nathan's eyes. Could he possibly be this sensitive about it? "Seriously, Rose, that dress is killer. What's the occasion?" Sarah's voice jolted me from my work daydream. "Oh, nothing special," I lied, smoothing down the skirt I bought on a recent shopping spree. A few months ago, work clothes were the last thing on my mind, but lately, they've become a strange source of focus. Was I subconsciously trying to catch someone's eye? The thought made me squirm with guilt. The fact was, my insecurity was ballooning. Nathan's distance felt like a constant reminder of that careless comment, a confirmation of my nagging suspicion that he wanted someone stronger. Leaving work, I now lingered at the loud, neon-lit bar downstairs, letting my coworkers convince me to stay for just one more. It was there I met Alex, all playful banter and cocky smiles. He didn't care if I was a bit of a pushover, in fact, it seemed to fuel his bravado. His attention was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the emptiness I felt waiting for a text, a touch, a flicker of warmth from Nathan. It started small, shared jokes over late-night drinks, a flirty text message here and there. I told myself it was harmless, a little ego boost to combat the growing distance at home. But soon, the buzz I got from Alex's attention wasn't so little anymore. My friends noticed the change in me. "You're glowing, girl, did you get a new workout routine or something?" I'd laugh it off, hiding the guilt churning in my stomach. The truth was, my glow wasn't coming from the gym, but from a dangerous mix of neglect, resentment, and the thrill of feeling desired again. The excitement of anticipating Alex's playful messages started to override my worry over Nathan. My outfits became bolder, my replies to Alex a little flirtier. All this attention was filling a void inside me, a void that had been growing for longer than I cared to admit. Nathan, wrapped up in his own hurt and withdrawal, seemed oblivious to the change in me. That was part of the problem, wasn't it? I needed him to fight for me, to notice, to make me feel wanted. And since he wasn't, well, Alex started to seem like a less and less terrible substitute. The buzzing of my phone dragged me from another restless sleep. It was a simple text notification, usually mundane, but this one sent a jolt of panic through me. "Card declined. Limit reached." My stomach plummeted. Nathan handled the finances. This had never happened before. For years, his steady income had provided a comfortable life, a safety net of dinners out and those little luxuries I'd come to see as necessities. My job as a freelance writer paid the bills, but fun money had always come from him. Honestly, I preferred it that way. Numbers and budgets stressed me out. But now, the unchecked retail therapy sessions I'd used to soothe the sting of Nathan's distance came screeching to a halt. The realization hit hard. I had become dangerously dependent on him, not just emotionally, but financially too. When I confronted Nathan, his reaction was worse than I'd expected. No trace of the gentle, generous man I thought I knew remained. His eyes were cold, his voice tight. "Rose, seriously? We need to talk about your spending. Do you even realize how much frivolous stuff you've bought?" His words burned. Yes, I knew the handbag was a splurge. Yes, those yoga classes were pricey. But wasn't this his role, to provide, to make life easier for me? The fact that now it felt like a weapon being turned against me ignited a spark of resentment I couldn't ignore. His solution was the final blow. "We need a budget," he declared. "One you can stick to, with clear contributions from you. No more free rides." His words echoed in my ears. Free rides. Was that how he'd always seen our relationship? Suddenly, the things I'd dismissed as Nathan being sweet now felt like calculated generosity. The power to withdraw it held over me. Grocery shopping morphed into a dreaded ritual. Every item I picked up, I pictured Nathan's critical gaze, heard his inevitable questions. Do we really need organic blueberries? Can't you get the store-brand cereal? It felt like every bit of control I'd passively relinquished was now being aggressively wrenched back, under the guise of financial prudence. Guilt had become my constant shadow. It lurked in the forced smiles I gave Nathan, the empty promises I made to myself. No more flirting with Alex, I'd repeat, only to find myself eagerly responding to his witty text minutes later. The thrill of his attention was like a drug, a potent antidote to the crushing loneliness and insecurity at home. The company's annual summer bash, usually a boring obligation, suddenly seemed like a beacon in the darkness. Dresses were meticulously tried on, makeup tutorials obsessively watched. It was a ridiculous amount of effort for a work event, but the yearning to feel desirable, even for just one night, was overpowering. The party was in full swing, the music loud, the drinks flowing freely. I found myself pinned into a corner by Alex, his touch bolder, his whispers landing too close to my ear. One drink turned into 3, then 4, and the guilt that usually kept me in check was fading into a hazy blur. The kiss happened suddenly. It was sloppy, fueled by liquor and an intoxicating mix of desperation and defiance. In that moment, I didn't think of Nathan, didn't picture the hurt on his face. All I wanted was to feel something other than the gnawing emptiness inside. The next morning, the shame hit me like a ton of bricks. What the hell did I do? The image of the kiss, Alex's smirk, played on repeat in my mind. I vowed it was a one-time thing, a drunken mistake born from the emotional roller coaster I'd been strapped into. But Alex had other plans. His texts grew relentless. The playful flirtation had morphed into something insistent, a dark undertone to his messages that sent a shiver of both excitement and fear down my spine. I found myself torn between revulsion and a twisted desire for more. It was a dangerous game, and I knew it. One night, after yet another silent dinner with Nathan, a text flashed. Drinks, my place, it read. The guilt screamed at me. My rational mind protested, but another part, fueled by resentment and the deep-rooted need for any kind of attention, whispered, just one. The second kiss wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A reckless, selfish choice made by a scared woman trapped in a cycle of neglect, guilt, and the desperate hunger to feel like she mattered. Stuck at the office again. Project's a nightmare, The lie rolled off my tongue with practiced ease as I sent a text to Nathan. It was a necessary evil. Each lingering look with Alex, each furtive rendezvous, required a trail of flimsy excuses to cover my tracks. The guilt, once so powerful, was dulling. Desperation was a powerful anesthetic. I'd tell myself it was temporary, that I'd end things with Alex once I felt somewhat in control again. But the truth, a truth I desperately pushed down, was that I was addicted to the rush of it all. Meanwhile, Nathan's withdrawal had turned into something far more sinister. His silence held a new edge, his gaze felt accusatory. When he'd try to engage in conversation, I'd snap, defensiveness my only shield. With each interaction, the chasm between us yawned wider. A creeping paranoia began to infect my days. Was that car following me? Were my hurried whispers into the phone in the bathroom being overheard? My reflection in the mirror looked haggard, the lies I spun starting to etch themselves onto my face. Then, the first text came. I see you. Just 3 words, sent from an unknown number. My blood ran cold. A sick joke? A wrong number? Or was it a warning shot across my bow, proof that my deception was about to be laid bare? The texts continued, growing increasingly menacing. Hints about my late nights, veiled references to my little secret. Someone was watching. Someone knew. The finger of suspicion began pointing directly at Nathan. Was this his twisted revenge for my betrayal? Confronting him was an act of desperation fueled by mounting terror. Is this you, sending me these sick texts? His denial wasn't the angry outburst I expected, but rather a look of genuine confusion that shook me to my core. That night, driven by a mix of fear and defiance, I crept into his room while he slept. His phone lay innocently on the nightstand. Scrolling through his texts, calls, and search history revealed nothing. No secret burner phones, no incriminating messages. The doubt was a corrosive acid eating away at the last shreds of my sanity. If it wasn't Nathan, then who? Had Alex gone completely unhinged? Or was I simply losing my grip on reality, every shadow proof of my own guilt? Guess what? I got that promotion. Nathan's voice was uncharacteristically jubilant. A jolt of fear shot through me before I could muster a convincing smile. My heart was pounding. Wasn't this the promotion our mutual friend Sarah had casually mentioned weeks ago? The one he hadn't breathed a word about? He went on about celebratory dinners, making a night of it. My mind raced, the guilt and paranoia choking me. How could I face him, knowing that every word out of my mouth was another lie, as the web I'd woven tightened around me? Later that evening, as he got ready for a work meeting, a desperate impulse took hold. His briefcase lay open, files sprawled across the bed. It was wrong, I knew it, but fear overrode reason. Rummaging through, my hands landed on a thick folder I didn't recognize. Inside wasn't the project proposal he'd mentioned, but rather legal documents. Real estate contracts, all bearing only his name. It was like the floor gave way beneath me. The house. The house we dreamed about, planned together, it was a solo endeavor all along. The cornerstone of our shared future was nothing more than a tool for his carefully calculated revenge. His return startled me, and I fumbled to hide the documents. The confrontation was inevitable, it exploded out of me. The teasing, his chilling withdrawal, the affair, those damn texts. Everything came tumbling forth in a torrent of fear and self-loathing. The rage I expected never came. Instead, Nathan just slumped into a chair, the mask of warmth finally slipping away. When he spoke, his voice was chillingly calm. Yes, Rose, I know about the affair. Did you think I was that oblivious? The texts, the sickening game he'd played, preying on my guilt, it was all his doing. My vision blurred with tears. This wasn't the Nathan I knew, the man I thought was so weak, so easy to manipulate. This was a stranger fueled by a deep, calculated fury, his eyes blazing with icy satisfaction. You mocked me, made me feel small. You underestimated me, he continued, his voice low. Well, this is what it feels like to have the power back. The foundation of our relationship wasn't just cracked, it was pulverized. In its place stood a chilling truth. I'd been hopelessly outplayed in a game I never saw coming. My mind was a hurricane of shock and disbelief. Nathan, my sweet, sometimes overly accommodating Nathan, had orchestrated this elaborate web of deceit. The magnitude of his betrayal rendered me almost speechless. Suddenly, desperation washed over me, replacing the initial shock. Nathan, please, I choked out, a pathetic imitation of the woman I'd been mere hours ago. Can't we fix this? I was wrong, I made a mistake. The plea died on my lips as I saw his gaze, vacant, devoid of any lingering warmth. My pleas for forgiveness weren't about love anymore, but about raw, animalistic terror. The life I knew, the comfortable existence, all hinged on this man before me. His next words turned my blood to ice. This was never about fixing things, Rose. It was about payback. He calmly laid out the chilling details, the slow withdrawal of affection, the way he'd fostered my resentment, all designed to drive me straight into another man's arms. Worse, he had proof. Dates, times, incriminating details of my affair, meticulously gathered. This wasn't just revenge, it was a weapon, one he could wield to destroy not only our marriage, but my reputation if I dared to walk away. The room seemed to spin. I wasn't just in a failing marriage, I was trapped, ensnared in a nightmare of my own making. Every careless word, every thoughtless act, had been a brick in the wall of this prison. Panic fueled a burst of venomous anger. You're a monster, I spat, manipulative, twisted. How could you? I loved you. He simply shrugged, a chillingly casual gesture. Call me whatever you want, Rose. But remember, you called me weak. Well, this is what it feels like to finally reclaim the power. His words echoed in the silence. His twisted logic was undeniable. I had dismissed him, belittled him, and now, he'd played me like a pawn in a horrific, long-drawn-out game. The realization washed over me. I wasn't the victim here, merely the fool who had sealed her own fate. The sound of the door slamming shut was deafening. In that stark moment, the finality of it all hit me. Nathan was gone. He moved with a speed and efficiency that mirrored his chilling scheme of revenge, leaving nothing behind but empty drawers and the lingering scent of his aftershave. Days later, the blow came in the form of a crisp white envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it, a summons, the opening salvo in a legal battle I couldn't afford to fight. Nathan's lawyer was ruthlessly precise, citing infidelity, my reckless spending. Every transgression meticulously laid out. Hope flickered when I reached out to my friends. Maybe Sarah, with her compassionate heart, would still be in my corner. That hope died quickly. Each conversation began with tentative sympathy until I was forced to reveal the whole ugly truth, Nathan's manipulations, my role in driving him to this dark place. One by one, their voices cooled, their support curdling into judgment. "You made him sound so awful, Rose," Sarah had said, disappointment heavy in her tone. "But playing mind games? That's just another level." The unspoken accusation stung. I couldn't even paint myself as the victim convincingly anymore. My past complaints about Nathan, now exposed, seemed like damning proof of my own cruelty. Eviction came with swift brutality. My landlord, a friendly face until news spread, barely met my eyes as he handed me the notice. Boxes piled up haphazardly, my belongings no longer fitting into the life I'd built. My parents, shamed and disapproving, reluctantly offered shelter, my old childhood bedroom, a stark contrast to the luxurious master suite I once called home. Social circles dissolved like sugar in water. Whispers followed me, the cheater, the gold digger. My frantic attempts to explain, to frame myself as a victim trapped in Nathan's elaborate revenge scheme, fell on skeptical ears. Time stretched into an endless dirge. Menial jobs, once unthinkable, became a lifeline. Each meager paycheck was a harsh reminder of the life I'd taken for granted, the consequences of my carelessness laid bare. In the quiet darkness of my childhood room, surrounded by teenage relics, the truth was inescapable. My choices led me here, each selfish act another stone on the path to... Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Relationship Haven. In today's story, OP found out his wife cheated on him with his coworker after he went to work one day and noticed his wife's car was in the parking lot. When he approached the car, he saw his wife and his coworker together and immediately knew something was wrong. He then confronted the affair partner and knocked him out. Justice was served. In today's second story, OP just caught his wife cheating on him a few days ago and needs advice on how to proceed. Now let's get into today's stories. So to start off, I don't really like using platforms like this, but I need to let this out and vent somehow. So here I go. I and my wife have been together for 11 years and I thought everything was good between us until recently. For some context, I work as a dispatcher for truckers and it's a pretty good job. I get good benefits and I make enough where we can both be comfortable. My wife had a job with building gaming computers, but she lost it due to cutbacks. I've been the sole earner ever since and have been picking up a lot of hours. One day my car battery died on me, so I had my wife take me to work and when we made it to the parking lot, I saw my coworker, Andrew. I waved at him and he walked over to say hello. And that was when I introduced him to my wife and she got into the car to shake his hand. He looked at me and said, "You never told me that your wife was so beautiful." She blushed and I laughed, not thinking about it, saying, "Yeah, I'm lucky to have her." And then we both walked into work after I kissed my wife goodbye. A few days later, I was heading to my car for a lunch break and I couldn't help but notice my wife's car in the parking lot. I then walked towards it and saw her and Andrew talking and eating lunch in her car. I got upset, but kept it cool and knocked on her window. She opened the door and said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you that me and Andrew were having lunch today together." Then Andrew said, "I hope you're not angry." I took a deep breath and said no. And I turned around and walked to the car because if I said anything else, it was going to start an argument. I could tell my wife was frustrated that I walked away like that. So later that day when I got home, she blew up on me, saying that I embarrassed her in front of Andrew. I told her, "Why do you even care? And when did you even start to hang out with him?" She responded by saying, "I'm a grown woman and I don't have to tell you anything." Since then, she has been distant and I noticed she's been on her phone more calling and texting her friends. But I know that it's Andrew and don't want to accuse her and then get it wrong. Update. I talked to my friend and he gave me an Apple AirTag. I'm going to put it in my wife's car and trail her to see if I can find anything and also collect evidence so I don't get screwed over in court. Quick recap. My wife has been hanging out with my coworker, Andrew, without telling me. And when I found out she started getting distant from me, so I suspected that she's been cheating on me with him. When I started to suspect it, my friend gave me his AirDrop and I hid it in my wife's car and then followed her. She told me that she was going to see a friend, but I didn't believe it. So I followed her in my friend's car to make sure she couldn't spot me. And after a 20-minute drive, she drove up to a hotel. During that drive, I felt sick and my heart kept pounding. I was really hoping that I was wrong and she was seeing a friend, but instead I saw Andrew waving at my girlfriend, and then I saw her running and jumping on this guy, then kissing him. I was so hurt and angry that I wanted to get out and beat Andrew up and then tell my wife to get all of her crap out of the house. Instead, I took my phone out and took some pictures, then drove off when I saw them walk into the hotel. I went home and cried, then punched a hole in the wall that was feeling too many emotions at once. I called my friend and went over to his place, then showed him the pictures and started crying again. I screamed, 11 years down the drain. My friend gave me a hug and told me to get a lawyer and to keep stacking up evidence against her. I didn't know if I could keep up the face anymore, but I told my friend I'll try. During these past few weeks, I've been stacking up evidence and keeping my distance. I've seen them go to restaurants, movies, hotels, and every time it hurt, but I toughed it out. She always told me she was going out with her friends or family, but I never called her out on it and said okay. I thought I could keep it up for at least a few more days, especially because the lawyer I'm seeing told me I have more than enough evidence to make sure I win and keep everything when we divorce, but I think I messed up yesterday. Yesterday was my birthday, and I wasn't really feeling it. My wife didn't even tell me happy birthday, but her parents did, and when I went to work, my coworkers got me a cake and some gifts. I tried holding back the tears because for a moment I forgot about everything, at least until I saw Andrew. He got me a gift, and I faked a smile and said thank you. When I opened it, it was the comic Batman, Death of the Family. I was actually surprised because no one at work knew I was into comics, and DC was my favorite. When I told Andrew that, he said my wife told him, and then all I saw was red. Next thing I know, my coworkers are holding me back and Andrew is in the corner covering his nose and yelling profusely. Then I screamed, I know you've been screwing my wife, and everyone got silent and then looked at Andrew. He tried explaining it to me, but I didn't care. All I wanted to do was beat him up until he stopped moving. Next thing I know is my boss came in and sent Andrew home, then brought me in his office and I told him everything and then showed him some of the pictures. He apologized to me and gave me some time off to sort everything out and said he will deal with Andrew. When I got home, my wife was waiting and she blew up on me saying that I was wrong for doing that to Andrew and that she talked him out of pressing charges for hitting him. Then she went on to say, Andrew makes me feel like a real woman and treats me right and knows how to make me feel special. I had enough and yelled, if he makes you feel special, go live with him and have him support you because I'm done. Then she had the nerve to cry and say that she was sorry. Plus, she tried saying how Andrew caught her at a moment of weakness, but I just took a deep breath and told her to get a lawyer because we're getting a divorce. She tried to apologize and said that she can't afford one and that we need to work on us, but I just looked at her and told her to pack up. She kept crying and begging, but I just got her suitcase and called her sister to come pick her up. But she locked herself in the bathroom saying she won't come out until I was willing to work things out with her. I kept telling her that I didn't want to work anything out and we needed space because when I see her, I feel angry and hurt. She finally got out and apologized and then she packed her stuff and waited outside for her sister. Now I'm finally in the house alone and I can't stop crying. I feel so many things and I just don't know anymore. I'm going to see my lawyer tomorrow. Sorry if I was all over the place with my post. I'm just feeling horrible and emotional, but I'm planning on seeing a therapist soon. Wow, OP. It's very sad to hear that your wife could betray you in such a shameful way like that. She has absolutely no remorse and is trying to play victim here. The good thing is you've done everything you can to deal with this crappy situation. As you said, stack up the evidence you have against her and show her lawyer. She will be history. You need to divorce her ASAP and continue to go no contact with her. I'm glad you got revenge on her affair partner by completely making a fool out of him in front of everyone at your workplace. Hopefully your boss fires him so that you will never have to see that clown again as well as your wife too. Best of luck to you, OP. Now let's get into today's second story. To give some background, me and my wife met when we were around 10 years old. We have had a thing for each other ever since but only got serious when we turned 18. I knew she was infatuated with me and I was with her, so the only plausible next step was marriage. I proposed to her on Valentine's Day at a getaway weekend when we were 21, and the rest is history. We both make it work with money in our day-to-day lives. Everything was perfect in my mind. The infidelity began when I was using her phone. I saw texts from a guy from her work. This wasn't any direct flirting but was still odd and suggestive if you ask me. She'd say things like I've had such a long day at work and he'd say they need to relax together and so on. I admit I have a temper and I was not about to let this happen. I told her she can no longer contact him and to block him in front of my face. I told her I would leave her if she didn't. She did everything I asked. So this brings me to Sunday night. I own a business with my cousin. We started at around age 20 and it really took off. We have an office where I sometimes sleep when the workload gets on top of me. So I text my wife from about midday saying me and my cousin are going to probably be here all night. I'll order in so you can eat without me and don't wait up. Love you. She responded minutes later telling me she was a bit sad she wasn't going to see me that night but wished me well with my work and said she loves me too. All was good. Fast forward to later that night. I decided the work had taken enough of my weekend and that I wanted to see my wife who I thought also wanted to see me. So around 7 p.m. I began making my way home. When I got home I heard talking upstairs but couldn't make it out so I went up and there I saw my wife and the guy. I admit I didn't handle it the best I could have. I started by beating him up and he tried to say, "Look man, I'm sorry, don't hurt me." I kicked him out of the house and sent him to walk home without his shoes. My wife was hysterical from the moment I walked in and I came very close to getting physical with her but I didn't. Through all of this she cried and cried saying it was a stupid mistake but by this point my concerns from the text messages were proved to be justified. I repeatedly told her to save her breath and that I did not want to hear any of the idiotic explanations she had. I considered going back to the office but I said no, forget that, and told her to get her stuff and stay wherever she could. I wanted her out of my sight. She stayed with her best friend since. My phone has been blown up by her friends and family since but I've ignored them. I told her dad what happened though. He was livid and took my side. Since the first day my anger has transitioned to sadness over the fact that our almost lifelong journey has been thrown away for some sleazy dude from her work. I have been staying busy but would be lying if I said every idle moment I get hasn't been spent sulking, crying or lamenting over what happened. I'm contacting my lawyer tomorrow morning to get our divorce rolling. After the first post I did quite a few things. Got STD checked, all clear. I signed my share of the business over to my business partner, my cousin, until the divorce is settled. I canceled her phone contract that I paid for, took down all pictures I had with her and packed all of her clothes up. The STD check was negative, which was a good start but still not enough to get me out of the dumps. The situation still had me upset. I was unable to forget about it due to her family and her family constantly blowing up my phone. I eventually went for a sit-down with her parents. Her mom attempted to talk me back into the family whereas her dad knew I was a man set in my ways and was very disappointed in his daughter. This happened about 2 days after the post. I like her dad and believe we'll stay in contact due to the fact that we are both simple men who understand each other. I've always respected him and it's a shame his daughter is stopping me from legally being his son anymore. As for her friends who have called me more times than I could count, I just ignored them. I spent a lot of time with my friends and family, which helped. I had a friend come over and we spent a few hours taking down pictures of her and taking all her stuff out of the house. This was very therapeutic for me and felt as though I was washing the stain from my life. It helped 10 times more than I thought it would. Divorce proceedings are in order, however I believe I'll have serious issues with her signing the papers and so on. I already signed away my share of my company so she doesn't get her cheating hands on that. I've gone complete no contact other than with lawyers as you all suggested. I battled with the idea of using the man's wife as leverage in case he tried to press charges on me. I did lay hands on him when I caught him in my home. In the end I thought why not and messaged her on Facebook. She initially believed me and then came back and said he told her that it's a lie. All I had to do was show her the doorbell footage of him entering my front door and being sent away without his shoes. I don't think he's happily married anymore. Now on to my next chapter. My mother thought it would be fun for me to come to her work Christmas party. I thought why not since I hadn't gotten out at all since the incident and deserved a little time out. I went and was introduced to one of her coworkers' daughters. We hit it off and actually left the party together but didn't hook up that same night. A few nights before Christmas Eve she came over and we properly hit it off. We hooked up numerous times and she ended up staying for 2 nights. Now she's no love at first sight but she is a lovely woman who's most definitely keeping me in good company during the time I need it most. Christmas Day was harder than I expected as I spent it with my significant other for a while. However, my family was around me keeping me fed, which helped a lot. Overall, I think I'm coping way better than I thought I would. Just wanted to say thanks again to everyone who reached out to me. OP, I'm glad to hear what has transpired in your life since finding out about the affair. You seem to be in a good place mentally and have things to be happy about. I'm hoping that the woman you just met can blossom into a healthy relationship. I do find it kind of concerning that you signed away your business during this time period. It may come across as suspicious to the court and seem like you have something to hide. Hopefully it doesn't work out that way though. I'm glad you are healing well from the situation and wish you all the best. Thanks for taking the time to listen to today's stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and comment below on what your thoughts are on today's stories. If there's a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Sarah knew today would be a disaster before the alarm even screamed her awake. That was the trouble with hating your life. Every morning was a confirmation, a fresh stab of disappointment with a side of stale toast. She'd barely uttered a grumpy greeting to Mark and a half-hearted command to her indifferent teenagers before the fighting began. It started with the dishwasher. Sarah had a system, whoever cooked didn't unload. Today it was Mark's turn, but he feigned cluelessness, eyes blinking owlishly behind his glasses. Huh. Isn't it, recycling day? The fight that followed wasn't even a real fight, just the usual tired exchange of veiled insults and passive-aggressive sighing. But something in her snapped this time. Maybe it was the way Mark's normally slumped posture seemed to straighten, a tiny flicker of defiance in his eyes. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Weak, she hissed. You're just a doormat. Everything falls on me. She hated the words instantly. They hung rancid in the air between them. His face hardened. If you think I'm so weak, he said, voice low and laced with unexpected steel. Why don't you watch me be strong? Watch me let you have what you really want, he trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. But the echo of it lingered, heavy as a threat. The rest of her day spiraled by in a blur of work, numbingly familiar, the sting of their morning quarrel fading into a dull throb behind her eyes. But Mark's words slithered back in the quiet of the evening. Did he mean it as a threat? Or was it insinuating something else, something buried under years of unspoken longing and frustration? A strange mixture of guilt and anticipation fluttered in her chest. Later, driven by restlessness and a stubborn flicker of defiance, Sarah found herself staring at her laptop screen. She opened a tab she usually avoided, fingers shaking slightly as she navigated to an online forum she knew existed but never dared to visit. It was a forum buzzing with whispers of desires seldom confessed, a place where couples explored the fringes of their comfort zones. Using a hastily created throwaway account, she typed with frantic fingers. I want more. I want fire. But where do I even find that? The response came within the hour, a direct message glowing softly on the screen. You will and then some. The username sent a shiver down her spine. Masterful. Tell me how, she typed back, surprised by her own boldness. The reply came back a heartbeat later. All power is a shared experience. There's a dance to it. Something about his words, the veiled confidence, ignited a long dormant yearning. It felt thrilling, reckless, and she knew, deeply, undeniably dangerous. Sarah clicked off her computer, the rhythmic hum of the dishwasher the only sound in the house. The ending of this chapter would be written far beyond their little kitchen battleground. Had she just opened a Pandora's box, or was this the jolt of excitement she'd been so desperately craving? The not knowing both terrified and exhilarated her, and she had an eerie suspicion that her life was never going to be quite the same again. The end of this chapter would find Sarah a different woman from the one who'd started. The bored housewife, the disgruntled mother, she was still there, but buried beneath something new. Power, or the promise of it, thrummed in her veins. The consequences still a distant storm cloud on the horizon. You'll look different, of course, Masterful instructed smoothly. Something that makes you feel powerful, daring. Sarah studied her reflection, barely recognizing the woman staring back. The mousy brown hair was now a fiery red, cut into a sharp asymmetrical bob. He'd sent the money for the salon and the new outfit, a scarlet dress tight enough to reveal every curve, a far cry from her usual jeans and sweaters. Their video calls intensified, Sarah found herself speaking thoughts she'd never dared voice aloud, playing roles, acting scenes of dominance and submission. Yet even behind the screen, those moments of vulnerability left her exposed. Masterful, his face always obscured in careful shadow, seemed to know her too well. It was as thrilling as it was unnerving. "One day soon we'll take this to the next level," he murmured, his voice a low rasp across the speakers. Sarah shuddered, unsure if the tremor was fear or anticipation. He spoke of meeting places, of hotel rooms, of turning her fantasies into reality. Something darker underlay those silken promises, a veiled challenge, a hint of control that set her teeth on edge. Meanwhile, a strange twist occurred in her real life. Mark's transformation was undeniable. His usual passivity was replaced by a quiet, almost unnerving confidence. Flowers left anonymously on the kitchen counter, expensive chocolates tucked in her gym bag. The change in him sent tremors down Sarah's spine. Was this him sensing her restless energy? Trying to win her back? Or was it a silent acknowledgement that he knew about her secret online world? That doubt festered until the day she accidentally stumbled on an open email on Mark's neglected laptop. Not an affair, that much was clear, but something equally clandestine. Company names she didn't recognize, discussions of untraceable offshore accounts, sums of money that made her gasp. It was the confirmation, the shocking illumination of another side of Mark. Not weak, far, far from it. Her husband wasn't the milquetoast man he pretended to be. Had his ominous words, "Watch me be strong," been a bizarre form of foreshadowing, a clue left for her amidst the hurt from their earlier fight? Had he known about her online rebellion, her flirtation with Masterful? Panic gnawed at her, twisting alongside a strange, forbidden thrill. Had her own double life exposed her to something far more dangerous? Mark, as it turned out, was a master of deception too. She'd accused him of weakness, of letting her walk all over him. Now the terrible possibility bloomed. What if he had been playing a long game, using her boredom and discontent? Sarah knew that from the moment she agreed to meet Masterful, the game was no longer hers to control. But this? This was not a twist she'd predicted. The ending of this chapter? Well, neither she nor the reader would see it coming. The laptop became her nightly companion. Files scrolled through late into the night while Mark snored beside her, blissfully oblivious. Each detail she unearthed was another piece of a puzzle that made less and less sense. The shell companies, the coded emails, they pointed to something beyond the usual white-collar crimes she'd first imagined. Had Mark stumbled into something darker? Something his meek persona had cleverly masked for years? "He seems distracted," Sarah mentioned casually to Mark over breakfast one morning, noting the telltale dark circles under his eyes, the way he nearly spilled his coffee. A flicker passed over his face, guilt, or calculated surprise at her newfound interest in his work life. The most unlikely lifeline came from yoga class. Sarah, a mousy woman with perpetually hunched shoulders and a worried frown, sidled up to her after a particularly grueling session. "You seem stressed," she'd said in that breathy voice. "Want to get coffee sometime?" Sometimes it helps to talk. Surprisingly, it did. Amidst lattes and spilled secrets, Sarah found something invaluable, a perspective outside her own echo chamber of suspicion. "Those kinds of transactions, they're not just tax dodges, Sarah. My husband sees patterns like that at work, it's way shadier." Yoga, Sarah confided, her eyes wide with concern. Her husband, it turned out, was an accountant, a man who lived and breathed spreadsheets. He'd noticed irregularities in a local company recently, something similar to the patterns of Mark's emails. Just the hint of a lead ignited a desperate energy within Sarah. The two women, driven by different motives, launched a clumsy investigation. Late-night calls, whispered conspiratorial coffee dates replaced yoga and PTA meetings. Sarah felt both exhilarated and terrified. The once mundane routines of her life suddenly spiced with clandestine meetings and coded conversations. Then came Masterful's demand. He was growing impatient for a real meeting, his tone shifting from playful to insistent. She wavered, a battle waging inside her. Fear, the sensible part of her, screamed to cut him off. Yet the recklessness that had taken root demanded to know the truth. She would meet him. A single encounter, strictly to see his face and hopefully glean some clue about Mark's tangled web of deceit. The bar he chose was dimly lit, almost anonymous. She arrived early, her pulse a frantic drumbeat beneath her carefully put-together facade. Each man who entered sent a frisson of panic through her. But it was the sight of the familiar figure who eventually walked through that door that truly turned her world upside down. Not some underworld criminal, not a stranger at all. It was someone utterly unexpected, someone who resided within her own life. That single reveal was the detonator, blowing apart the flimsy narrative she'd constructed. Her husband, quiet, passive Mark, had threads connecting him to her online seducer, threads that spoke of a life lived in darkness right beside her own. Sarah wasn't sure if the world around her had truly spun off kilter, or if it was just the relentless pounding behind her eyes. It was the face she recognized the instant shock wore off. That did the damage. That single moment blasted her life into a strange before and after duality. She'd never see that man the same way again, and the realization was both sickening and liberating. The confession to Yoga Sarah was meant to be a seeking of clarity. Instead, the clarity came from a completely unexpected source. Mark? Sarah echoed in disbelief as Sarah's usually soft gaze grew flinty. You think your husband is this masterful character? The question hung between them, heavy and accusation-laced. In her heart, Sarah knew it was preposterous. Mark? With his penchant for early nights and beige sweaters? He wasn't capable of playing such a dominating game. But her world was unhinged, logic thrown out like so much discarded wrapping paper. Every casual touch from Mark, every word he uttered was contaminated now with the ghost of his online persona. Was that a caress or a calculation? His sudden acts of thoughtfulness weren't romantic. They were twisted manipulations, weren't they? She couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Just watched him, a silent, simmering accusation in her eyes. Yoga Sarah, sensing an opportunity, nudged her forward. Let's just follow him. Keep a distance, see where he goes. What harm could it do? Amateurish as it was, the surveillance was a balm to Sarah's frantic need for action. She'd tail Mark after dropping the kids off, slip away during lunch breaks with her new co-conspirator. Mark's routine was infuriatingly ordinary. Gym, office, grocery store, home. Yet there was that lingering sense, the certainty that the man she saw was merely the tip of the iceberg. His laptop became a minefield, every file scrutinized. She discovered cleverly hidden folders, transactions meticulously scrubbed, just vague enough to hint at something nefarious. You have to confront him, Sarah insisted, her usual timidity replaced with fierce determination. He's playing you, Sarah, playing you both. Now fueled by a mix of fear, betrayal, and a desperate need for truth, Sarah finally reached her breaking point. What is this? She hissed, shoving the printouts under Mark's nose as he got ready for bed. Who are you, really? Feigned confusion gave way to careful calculation in his eyes. It was just a flash, but enough to confirm his guilt. The fight that erupted was cathartic and horrific all at once. Words she'd only imagined spitting in Masterful's face were instead hurled at her husband. Mark countered with denials, then threats, then strangely with appeal to twisted logic, an attempt to somehow justify his deception as empowering for her. The argument spiraled into absurdity, ending with her sobbing on the floor, feeling neither strong nor empowered, but small, foolish, and utterly lost. Sarah was trapped in her own personal horror movie, complete with a manipulative husband as the lead villain and a soundtrack of her own doubts echoing relentlessly. The end of this chapter would see her bruised, terrified, but finally waking up to the true danger she faced. Mark was coldly efficient. He never raised his voice now, just laid out his defense with a chillingly calm demeanor that cut deeper than any shouting match. You see shadows, Sarah, he chided. You're twisting innocent things. Perhaps you need help. A good therapist could sort out these delusions. Those words, delivered with a mix of pity and scorn, echoed in her skull during sleepless nights. Was this all just some bizarre breakdown on her part? The fiery redhead, the illicit video calls? Was she losing her grip on reality? Fueled by a desire for drama her mundane life couldn't provide? Sarah, her usual meekness replaced by a desperate defiance, clung to Yoga Sarah as her one lifeline. He's gaslighting you, Sarah insisted when presented with Mark's twisted accusations. Ignore him. Just focus on the evidence. You have it. But the tension between the two women began to crackle under the pressure. Yagasara's quiet life was upended by this intrigue. Her husband grew suspicious, her world off kilter. Sarah felt selfish, dragging this friend into her own self-created mess. Could she blame her if Sarah decided to cut ties and run? It all climaxed one rainy Thursday evening. Sarah, fueled by a gut instinct she couldn't quite explain, arrived home expecting an empty house. But Mark's car was in the driveway. Inside she found him tearing apart their home office, searching frantically for something. His mask of calm completely shattered. He unleashed a chilling tirade when he saw her. "You have to stop this," he snarled. "Do you have any idea what you've stumbled into?" This wasn't about playing the hurt husband anymore. It was something darker. His desperation ignited a cold fire in her. She would not be his victim. Words turned to shoves into an all-out struggle. Mark, always physically unimpressive, revealed a surprising strength, fueled by desperation. A crash, a scream, then darkness. When her vision cleared enough to make sense of her surroundings, she realized she was slumped against the wall, dizzy and disoriented. Above her, two men were grappling, Mark no longer the one in control. "Easy now." A gruff voice she didn't recognize grunted as they subdued a thrashing, cursing Mark. The man turned towards her, his face scarred and hard. Was this just another layer of the nightmare? A new tormentor in her twisted game? His actions said otherwise, though. He carefully collected Sarah's scattered files, Mark's laptop, and even helped her into his unremarkable sedan. "I owed you this, Sarah," he said quietly as they pulled away from the house. A long time ago, it turned out this stranger was a key from Sarah's own past, a man Mark had wronged years before. This was revenge playing out, and she was caught in the crossfire. Mark's world, as it turns out, was far darker than a few shady business deals. This was something vast, brutal, and she'd unknowingly ripped open its underbelly. Clarity came, not as a wave of relief, but as a cold knot of determination. No more games, no more fantasies. It was time to survive, and for survival, she needed the truth, no matter how dangerous. The seed planted by her mysterious savior had begun to sprout, a twisted, stubborn thing that took root in the barren soil of her shattered life. Fear was still there, a constant companion, but now it was edged with a steely determination. Sarah was done being a chess piece. It was time to take control of the board, and her first opponent? Mark. He'd underestimated her, and now she'd use his arrogance against him. Her new partner, the man known only as Cal, was an enigma. His weathered features and the network of scars on his knuckles spoke of a violent past. His motives were unclear, yet he held some grudge against Mark, some debt to be repaid. This wasn't about rescue, but about leverage, and Sarah was ruthlessly aware of her place as a pawn in their larger game. Each address he handed her became a stop on her own private investigation. Warehouses by the docks, seedy hotels on the city's fringes. The world she uncovered reeked of desperation and greed, a far cry from the sanitized spreadsheets and jargon of Mark's dealings. Men with hollow eyes handled boxes that hinted at horrors, not mere accounting discrepancies. Sarah's boredom, the discontent that had fueled her initial recklessness, was replaced by a chilling realization. She'd stumbled into a web of true human misery. She started to play her own dangerous game, dropping hints to Mark, leveraging the very real fear now in his eyes. Late-night untraceable texts alluding to discoveries he hadn't anticipated her making. Each panicked reaction from him was a data point, a piece of the puzzle. His world was unraveling and she was the one tugging on the loose threads. It was terrifyingly liberating. Yoga Sarah, now reluctantly drawn deeper into this against her better judgment, became Sarah's confidant and accomplice. "You think they'll try and silence you?" Sarah asked one evening, her voice barely a whisper. The fear was real, yet so was the odd thrill. Could she face that possibility now? The answer came sooner than expected. A break-in at her house, nothing of value taken, just an overturned vase and a note scrawled on the kitchen counter. "Stop digging." The threat hung in the air, both terrifying and strangely empowering. If they saw her as a problem, then she was more than the bored housewife Mark had so easily dismissed. The line in the sand was drawn. Sarah would have to cross it, but she wasn't sure how far she was willing to go. Could she stoop to their level? Use the blackmail material she'd gathered on Mark? The knowledge of his illicit dealings? The proof of how he was funding their shadowy enterprise? Betrayal, she discovered, was an even more potent fuel than desire. Each decision, each risky move painted her into a corner. There was no turning back to the woman she was. Sarah would likely never emerge from this unscathed, and the truth, when finally found, might destroy what was left of her life. Yet she barreled forward, driven by a relentless need for answers, and perhaps an even deeper need for retribution. Sarah knew how this story was supposed to end. But like everything in her new reality, the predictable endings had been cruelly torn away, leaving her grasping for any kind of control. The twist she hadn't bargained for, though, was that it wouldn't be her husband's destruction, but her own, that she had to prevent. Mark's meticulously crafted facade was crumbling, and it wasn't satisfying, just terrifying. The meek, bespectacled accountant was now a manic, sweating mess, his threats laced with panic. "You'll get us all killed," he'd shriek during one particularly nasty fight. "They know you're poking around, poking where you shouldn't." His control, once her weapon against him, was now a liability. He was a rat trapped in a corner, and that made him exponentially more dangerous. And just as he predicted, a new layer of fear descended. His people, the ones she caught glimpses of in dingy warehouses and overheard in hushed phone calls, were different. They weren't just pencil pushers in ill-fitting suits, but men with the look of true violence in their eyes. She was no longer a bored housewife to them, but a disruption in their operations. Then the sucker punch she never saw coming. "It'll be easier this way," Sarah Yogesera had stated, her soft eyes hardening into something Sarah didn't recognize. A crumpled envelope left on her doorstep revealed everything. Copies of their private conversations, their whispered plans, the photos, all marked up with red X's, an unsubtle confirmation of what was to come. The hunted had just become the primary target. The betrayal shattered the last vestiges of her old world. Now, there was no one, not even a frightened conspiracy theorist she could trust. Her world constricted to shadows, every car that slowed a little too long on her street, every stranger brushing past her, a potential threat, and yet she never felt more alive. Fear was her fuel now, keeping her sharp, forcing her to think like the criminals who pursued her. She reached out to Cal, that cryptic figure from her past. He wasn't a rescuer, she knew that, but he had a certain ruthlessness she now desperately needed. "You want to survive?" He'd grunted when she finally located his grimy, ever-shifting safe house. "Learn to hide in plain sight." Her transformation was brutal. The mousy wife, the fiery seductress, all were shed like unwanted skins. She dyed her hair back to a forgettable brown, ditched her meticulously chosen outfits for thrift store anonymity, learned to observe from the corner of her eye. Her world shrank to grimy bus terminals, pay-as-you-go cell phones, and cash transactions that left no trail. She was a ghost in her own life. The glimpses of the network's inner workings turned her stomach. Warehouses that looked ordinary from the outside, but held the haunted eyes of trafficked women, crates, their contents hinted at with sickening euphemisms. The enormity of it all was both crushing and galvanizing. If this was the up against, playing fairly wasn't an option. Morality now existed in shades of gray. She had to steal, to lie, even forge documents to keep breathing. She'd once prided herself on being a decent person, but decency was a luxury in this brutal new world. Survival demanded she become something far less, and the question that haunted her wasn't if she could do it, but how much of herself would be left by the time she was done. Sarah was no longer a player in this game, she was the dealer. The trap, meticulously planned with Cal's help, felt as cruel as it was necessary. She'd dangle Mark, wounded and desperate, as bait for the sharks now circling him. They needed the information he held, the codes and passwords and connections that kept their vile machine running. Mark would promise them everything in a last-ditch attempt to save his own skin, and they would fall for it. The abandoned warehouse Cal had chosen as the setting felt grimly appropriate. Once a place of shadows and whispers, it would now be the stage for their final act. Sarah, hidden in a dusty storage loft, watched them arrive. Mark, a pathetic wreck of a man, and the faces she'd only seen in blurry photos, men with eyes as cold as the steel they brought with them. "You set this up?" One of them growled at Mark, his voice barely containing a simmering violence. Sarah held her breath. Everything depended on Mark convincing them, on playing the part of hunted dog just convincingly enough. And then it went wrong. A flash of movement by a back entrance, a figure Sarah didn't recognize. One raised voice, a gunshot, and the carefully laid plan devolved into chaos. Screams, more shots, the warehouse now filled with the acrid stench of gunpowder. It was impossible to tell from her vantage point who had been hit or who was winning this fight she'd started. All Sarah knew was she was trapped, with the battle likely to spill up towards her soon enough. Panic warred with a strange sense of detachment. Was this what she had become? A woman for whom gunfire was the soundtrack to survival? Scrambling blindly across the loft, she found her escape route, a rusty ladder leading onto the roof. Mark was long forgotten. Her victory had morphed into a desperate fight for her own life. The end to Mark's story played out on that grimy rooftop. He lay crumpled beside the air conditioning unit, his eyes reflecting a mix of fear and surprise. Not at the betrayal by his wife that he must have expected, but at the identity of the man standing over him. Someone she knew, vaguely, from his circle. An unassuming face now twisted with a chilling satisfaction. Mark died without ever knowing the true puppet master he had served. The rest was a frantic blur. Escape aided again by Cal and his ever-changing vehicles. A safe house that was never truly safe. The constant sense of being tracked, followed, even in the quiet moments. But the network was fractured, its key players dead or scattered. She had achieved her goal, a Pyrrhic victory, leaving her tasting ashes, not the sweetness of vengeance she'd craved. Her nights were plagued by nightmares. Mark's accusing eyes, the hollow faces of trafficked women, the blood on her own hands. PTSD, Cal diagnosed with a casual shrug, happens to the best of us. The worst part, though, was the quiet moments when she'd stare at her own reflection, shocked by the coldness in her own eyes. Sarah didn't recognize the woman looking back at her. In the end, they did not meet for coffee again, she and the unlikely ally forged in the crucible of violence. They parted ways abruptly, a mutual understanding that their association was dangerous for them both. Sarah disappeared, a ghost leaving behind no forwarding address, no way to be found. The final scene isn't glamorous, it's a sparsely furnished apartment in a city she doesn't know, groceries purchased with cash, blinds permanently drawn. A text arrives, from a number she doesn't recognize. We're not done yet. It could be a threat, a reminder that the shadows were always there. Or maybe a twisted kind of invitation. This battle may be over, but the war, it seemed, wasn't. And a chilling part of Sarah was perversely drawn to the unknown, drawn to the danger that was all